Buonasera.
Buongiorno a tutti, buona puntata dei
Io
Dialoghi su
sono
Urbisaglia.
veramente in me.
Ciao!
Buongiorno a tutti, abbiamo oggi il piacere di avere con noi uno dei più grandi storici del libro del nostro periodo, cioè Robert Darnton. Buongiorno professore, good morning Robert.
Buongiorno.
Buongiorno. Robert Darnton è un altro di quei personaggi di cui in teoria non c'è bisogno di fare presentazioni. È stato, dopo essersi laureato alla Harvard University e a Oxford, dove ha conseguito il dottorato, ha lavorato per un breve periodo al New York Times occupandosi di cronaca nera, e da qui vediamo la sua grande abilità nella narrativa dei suoi scritti. E dopodiché ha insegnato per moltissimi anni a Princeton, e dopodiché è diventato professore di storia alla Harvard University, nonché direttore del sistema bibliotecario di Harvard. Si è occupato di moltissimi temi, soprattutto focalizzando i suoi interessi sulla storia del libro nel Settecento francese, occupandosi anche di storia della censura, dei libri proibiti, di produzione libraria. Suo è il famoso circolo del libro, una teoria che riguarda la produzione e la diffusione dei libri nella età moderna, nella prima età moderna. E oggi con noi parlerà di alcune delle sue, dei suoi lavori e delle sue teorie. Adesso iniziamo la nostra intervista. Robert, a first question about your love for 18th century book. So the book, as we know, had a very important role in the 18th century culture, but ultimately, at least for us in Italy, we know very little about this topic. Why did you choose to study this specific period, and how did you manage to tell such a complicated cultural history, mainly using economic and archival sources linked to material history?
You know, historians often become involved in subjects without intending to. So in 1965, I wandered into a fabulous archive in Neuchâtel, Switzerland. I was trying to trace the career of a future leader of the French Revolution, Jacques-Pierre Brissot, and they had letters of Brissot in this little Swiss town of Neuchâtel, but surrounding his letters were 50,000 letters of everyone who had anything to do with books. So I was intending to write a biography of Brissot, but then I discovered more interesting than Brissot actually were books themselves, how they were produced, how they were written, how they spread throughout society, how they became a force in history. So I dropped my biography of Brissot, and from 1965 on, I have been studying the history of books, but I began without knowing it because the word Histoire du livre, history of books, did not exist in 1965. I was doing the history of books without knowing it.
Okay, great. So the use of material of documents is because you basically found this treasure in this Swiss archive. And I was wondering, many of your books deal with focuses on forbidden books, censorship, clandestine reading, and you say that these are elements that originated the French Revolution. So my question is, can actually books really provoke a revolution?
Well, the question itself is provocative. And of course, historians and literary scholars have been worrying this question for decades, even for centuries. I think we would all agree that you can't have a simple line of causality, which goes from the printing of a book to the sale of the book, to the reading of the book, to the collective consciousness developed by it, and action, the outbreak of a revolution. So we're not talking about simple causality. Instead, we are discussing a general context. Now, books certainly were very important, I think, for creating a climate of opinion in which revolutionary action became thinkable. Now, that sounds awfully abstract, but I think recently I've been rereading some of the work of Gustave Tarde, a French sociologist who is not maybe too well known, but also Benedict Anderson. And they both discuss reading as a kind of experience that transforms relations. Instead of face-to-face relations, the individual reader identifies himself with a collectivity. I think that's what was going on in France in the 18th century. It happened in different ways, but as people read books, they felt that they belonged to this larger entity, which was the nation. Now, how did that happen? It happened in different ways because, of course, literature at that time was very complicated. I give you two examples. One, Voltaire. So Voltaire made people laugh and he made them feel superior to prejudice, to the kind of thing that was preached at them in churches. So this sense of belonging to a superior world of critical thinkers who could laugh at orthodoxy, I think empowered a lot of people. And then the other obvious example is Rousseau, who unleashed a tidal wave of not just sentiment, but people are weeping over his books. Douce larmes exist everywhere, but also a sense of belonging to a community powered by a common sense of indignation about injustice. So these are real forces in history. And before that, I think you didn't have a community, a collective consciousness as a result of reading.
Which is something that didn't happen in Italy or in the kingdoms and duchies of Italy. So this sense of community.
That's right. Of course, Italy is broken up into many different small states. You did have great periodicals like Il Caffè in Milan. And Beccaria had a very wide readership. I had to read a lot about the Italian Enlightenment when I was a student at Oxford. And I got to know Franco Venturi and to appreciate the power of the books and the periodicals in Italy at this time. But I don't think it was at all comparable to France, where you got this sense of a collective consciousness developed through the printed word. And then, of course, the printed word, newspapers as well as books, precipitated particular crises. So you got a libelous literature that attacked the key ministers on the eve of the French Revolution. I think they were very effective and very important. In other words, the power of books is operating at different levels. On the one hand, a large collective consciousness, and on the other, specific crises where public opinion turns against the government.
And there is where censors start acting. And censorship is something that, as you wrote in your book, still has its effectiveness, isn't it?
Yes, I think censorship is a fascinating topic because it's too easy to see censorship as a battle of the liberty of thought against oppression. In fact, in the 18th century, there were formal censors. Their names appear in the Royal Almanac. They're proud of this title. And they think of censorship not as repressing unorthodox ideas, but really of maintaining quality. I've seen this in studying their correspondence, notes they wrote to themselves. One of them said, "I defend the honor of French literature." And what they actually did was to give a stamp of approval about the quality of a book through writing approbations. However, there was also post-publication censorship, and that meant raiding bookstores, putting authors in the Bastille, suppression in general. And this post-publication censorship is what is best known. It was very important, and in fact, this required virtually the entire Enlightenment to be printed outside of France, smuggled into France, and distributed through an enormous underground system. So we had France actually surrounded by what I call a fertile crescent of publishing houses, dozens and dozens of publishers who are turning out not just the Enlightenment, but they are pirating everything that sells. So in other words, most French books are actually produced outside the law through this enormous industry. And I've recently completed a new book, not yet published, in which I argue that more than half of the books that actually were sold in France during the 20 years before the revolution, more than half are illegal. They're pirated or they are forbidden books.
This is great to know now that you are working on a book, a new book, and we are looking forward to reading it. So we can go now to another topic, which is different from the 18th century. So the question is, why after your great interest in this period, the 18th century culture, did you take an interest in contemporary issues such as digitization, e-books, the future of books? It was because of an interest of yours, or because of your work at the Harvard Library as a director of the Harvard Libraries?
Well, of course, I am a reader as well. I'm a citizen. I try to follow current events. And it so happened that long before I came to Harvard, I was involved in the publication industry. I was a trustee of the New York Public Library, a trustee of the Oxford University Press. I became involved as president of the American Historical Association with an attempt to create digital books. And in other words, I gradually developed a commitment to the world of books today, and especially the digital world. But then when I became the director of the Harvard University Library, I was faced with specific problems and possibilities. On the very first day at work, the lawyer for the university came in and he said, "You know, I must explain something to you. There is this outfit called Google, and they want to digitize all of the books in our library. But some of those books are protected by copyright. And we are involved in negotiations with Google." Well, imagine suddenly being cast into that role, a negotiator with Google, which is trying to reproduce all the books in the world. It's a long story, but basically, I thought that Google represented a danger, an attempt to create a new kind of monopoly, a monopoly of access to knowledge in digital form. And so I became involved in polemics, largely through the New York Review of Books. There was a kind of public outcry against Google. Finally, Google's case was brought before a federal court, and Google was declared that a violator of the law against monopoly. We then thought, well, we can out-Google Google because we can create a digital library of our own, which will not be commercial as Google's was, but rather which would be free, open access to everyone. That's called the Digital Public Library of America. We launched it now quite a while ago in 2013, and it has more than 30 million books available to everyone in the world, including Italy, free of charge.
Which is a great, great thing for the community in general, not only of readers. So nowadays, another question. With all activities blocked, unfortunately, because of this horrible crisis, we have learned, or at least we are learning, the civil value of digital media, of the internet, of the digital libraries, of the repositories. What do you think about this issue now, about the civil value of the digital media?
Well, it's of course easy to say that it's a wonderful new power. I think, however, we live in a very complex and ambiguous situation because the digital media can be used to evil effect. There's a lot of misinformation, of manipulation of people. There's also something called silo isolation, people operating inside silos or closed spaces where they only communicate with one another digitally and reinforce their prejudices. So my own hope is that digital communication will open things up instead of closing them within closed spaces like silos. And we are seeing that happening. I mean, there's a lot of communication of a new kind now. Earlier today, I sent a poem, my favorite poem, to someone over the internet as part of a chain. Each person should select a poem and pass it on. There are many, many things like this. So I think a kind of collective consciousness is developing of a new sort. It's not just national, it's international. All of us, such as you and I right now, are united digitally. And I'm hoping that this sense of belonging to a common humanity can help us get through a crisis which strikes all of humanity.
This is a great thought. And so, just to a last question, do you think that there is hope in terms of book history for the traditional book industry in the future?
I think it is a time of great hope. You know, more books are produced in print each year than the year before, certainly in the United States. Well over 300,000 new titles per year. These books sell. There is even a revival of independent bookstores. So it's not as if the book chains or Amazon have destroyed everything else. There's a revival going on. And what I find especially fascinating is that people are writing books and publishing them themselves on a huge scale. More than 700,000 new books are published by individual writers outside of the commercial network. So I think we've got the traditional book, both in its printed form and in its electronic form, have revived a sense of participating in literature, in communication in general, that is enormously powerful and positive.
Thank you very much, Professor Darnton, for this conversation and for casting light on many, many issues. So this is the end of our interview. I thank you again for your kindness, for your availability. Questa è la fine il termine della nostra intervista. E ringrazio il professor Darnton per aver avuto la bontà di voler parlare con noi e vi do appuntamento per il prossimo dei Dialoghi di Urbisaglia nel canale dei libri. Grazie a tutti e buon proseguimento.